What would you do if the police were called on you for simply sitting in a park, doing nothing wrong? Now, imagine you're 14 years old and the person who called the cops has already decided you're a criminal, just because of the way you look. It was on the Kasi evening where a boy named Omari sat on a weathered wooden bench beneath a towering oak tree in Greenfield Park, a bustling public space in Bristol. The late afternoon sun painted the park in golden hues, and the distant laughter of children playing on the swings blended with the rustle of leaves in the breeze. He checked his watch. His mum, Fiona, had texted earlier to say she was running late, but he didn't mind. The peaceful atmosphere of the park was a welcome break from the noise of the city. A sharp sensation, like being watched, prickled at the back of his neck. Omari glanced around and noticed a middle-aged woman seated on a bench across the path, her eyes fixed on him. Her face was tight with suspicion, her lips pressed into a thin line. The woman, later identified as Margaret, rose from her seat and approached with stiff, deliberate steps. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice clipped and accusatory. Omari blinked, startled by her tone. "I'm just sitting here waiting for my mum," he replied evenly, though his heart began to race. "This park is for families, not for people loitering about," she shot back, her eyes narrowing further. "You need to leave." Omari felt heat rise in his chest. "I'm not doing anything wrong. I've been sitting here quietly. It's a public park." Margaret's expression hardened. "If you don't leave now, I'll call the police," she declared, pulling her phone from her handbag. Omari stood slowly, his palms out in a gesture of peace. "There's no need for that. My mum will be here any minute," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. But Margaret wasn't listening. She was already dialing. "Hello? Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious young man in Greenfield Park," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet afternoon. "He looks like trouble?" Within minutes, the serene park was disrupted by flashing blue lights and the sound of police cars pulling up. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions cautious. Omari's breath quickened, and he instinctively placed his hands at his sides, keeping them visible. One officer, a tall man with a no-nonsense demeanor, approached Margaret. "What seems to be the problem, ma'am?" Margaret gestured toward Omari. "That boy's been hanging around here for hours. He's refused to leave and I'm worried about the families here." The officer nodded and turned to Omari. "What's going on, son? Can you explain yourself?" Omari cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. "I was just waiting for my mum. She's picking me up soon." The second officer, a woman with a softer tone, stepped forward. "Do you have any ID?" "I don't have one with me. I'm only 14, Omari said, frustration creeping into his voice. Please, if you enjoy true life story like this, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more captivating stories. Hope you've done? Okay, let's continue. The conversation was interrupted by the rumble of a sleek black Range Rover pulling up near the police cars. A tall woman with a commanding presence stepped out, her tailored coat and confident stride instantly drawing attention. Omari's face lit up. "Mom?" The officers straightened as recognition dawned. This wasn't just any mother. It was Fiona Edwards, the mayor of Bristol. She walked briskly toward the group, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice steady but carrying an unmistakable authority. Margaret's mouth fell open as the realization hit her. One of the officers hesitated before speaking. "We received a call about a suspicious individual, ma'am." "A suspicious individual?" Fiona echoed, raising an eyebrow. Her gaze shifted to Margaret. "And what exactly made my son suspicious, sitting in a public park?" Margaret stammered, her confidence rapidly dissolving. I thought he looked out of place." "Out of place?" Fiona's voice was soft but firm. "Because he's a black boy in a park?" Turning to the officers, Fiona continued, "I hope you've taken the time to assess the validity of this call. Or did you approach my son with assumptions based solely on Margaret's biases?" The taller officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we were just following up on the report." "Following up on a baseless accusation," Fiona said sharply. She turned to Margaret, her tone measured but cutting. "Do you understand the consequences your actions could have had? My son could have been hurt, or worse, all because you jumped to conclusions." Margaret's face flushed. "I didn't mean any harm. I was just trying to keep the park safe." "Safe from what?" Fiona shot back. "From a child sitting quietly waiting for his mum?" The crowd that had gathered murmured in agreement. Fiona addressed them, her voice strong and clear. "This is about more than just my son. It's about how we view and treat people in our community. Racial bias is dangerous and we all have a responsibility to confront it." Fiona placed a hand on Omari's shoulder. Are you all right? Omari nodded, though the tension was still evident in his posture. Yeah, I'm okay, he said quietly. She turned back to the crowd. Starting today, I'll be working with the council to implement anti-bias training for all city employees, including the police. We need to do better. As the mayor guided Omari back to the car, the crowd dispersed, their expressions thoughtful. The incident had sparked conversations that would ripple through Bristol in the days to come, forcing the city to reckon with the reality of racial bias and its impact. Omari glanced up at his mum as they drove away. Do you think things will really change? Fiona looked at her son, her expression a mix of determination and warmth. Change takes time, but it starts with moments like this. We can't stop pushing for it. The car disappeared down the road, leaving Greenfield Park quieter but forever changed. The next morning, Fiona sat in her office at Bristol City Hall, reviewing the flurry of emails that had poured in overnight. News of the incident in Greenfield Park had spread quickly, thanks in part to onlookers who had recorded the confrontation and shared it on social media. The videos painted a stark picture. Margaret's accusatory tone, the skepticism of the officers, and Fiona's poised but firm response. Her assistant, Priya, knocked lightly on the door before stepping in. Madam Mayor, the media's waiting for a statement, and the city council is asking for an emergency meeting. Fiona sighed. Let them know I'll address the press at noon. And set up the council meeting for later this afternoon. This isn't going away anytime soon. Meanwhile, Omari walked into his school with a mixture of unease and pride. Whispers trailed him as students glanced his way, some giving him supportive nods while others avoided eye contact. In his form room, his best friend, Kieran, greeted him with a grin. Mate, you're all over TikTok. You and your mum are proper legends. Omari gave a small smile, but his shoulders remained tense. I just wanted to go away. Everyone's acting like I did something special. All I did was sit in a park. Their teacher, Mr. Evans, interrupted the conversation as he entered the room. Class, before we begin today's lessons, I'd like us to take a moment to discuss something important. Omari froze as Mr. Evans continued. Some of you may have seen the news about Omari and his experience yesterday. It's a reminder that prejudice and bias are very real, even here in Bristol. Does anyone want to share their thoughts? A hand shot up. It was Lucy, one of Omari's classmates. I think it's horrible what happened to Omari. But honestly, it's not surprising. My older brother's been stopped by the police just for walking home late. Others nodded in agreement, and soon the room buzzed with personal stories and opinions. Omari listened quietly, realizing that his experience had opened a door to conversations many had been avoiding. At her home across town, Margaret sat at her dining table, staring at her phone. Her notifications were flooded with angry comments from strangers who had seen the video, calling her a bigot and demanding she apologize. Her husband, Peter, placed a cup of tea in front of her. You've got to say something, he urged gently. Margaret looked up, her eyes red from crying. What can I say? That I was wrong? That I acted out of fear? No one will believe me. You can't undo what's done, Peter replied. But you can learn from it. Go to the mayor. Apologize. Ask how you can make things right. After a long silence, Margaret nodded. That afternoon, the city council chamber was packed. Residents from all walks of life had come to hear Fiona's plan for addressing racial bias in the community. She stood at the front, addressing the crowd with her usual confidence. Yesterday's incident was a stark reminder of the work we still need to do. Today, I'm proposing a series of measures to combat bias and foster inclusivity in our city. She outlined her plan: mandatory anti-bias training for city employees, an independent oversight committee for the police, and community forums to discuss race and equality. As she spoke, Margaret entered the room, her presence drawing murmurs from the audience. Fiona noticed her but continued without pause. When Fiona finished, Margaret stood hesitantly. May I say something? The room fell silent. Please, if you enjoy true life story like this, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more captivating stories. Hope you've done? Okay, let's continue. Margaret's voice trembled as she began. Yesterday I made a terrible mistake. I judged someone without knowing anything about them. I let my fear override my common sense. And for that, I want to apologize, to Omari, to his family, and to this community. She turned to Fiona. If there's a way I can help with the changes you're proposing, I'd like to be part of it. I need to do better. Fiona studied her for a moment before nodding. Acknowledging our mistakes is the first step. Let's work together to ensure this doesn't happen again. The local police began hosting community meet and greets, breaking down barriers between officers and residents. Schools introduced discussions on racial bias as part of their citizenship curriculum, using real-world examples like Omari's story. Margaret volunteered at a youth center in Greenfield, working alongside young people from diverse backgrounds. Slowly, she began to understand the impact of her actions and the deeper roots of prejudice in society. Omari, encouraged by his school's debate club, started sharing his story at local events. "What happened to me isn't just about one person or one park," he said during a youth forum. "It's about how we see each other, and how we can do better." One Saturday morning, Omari and Fiona returned to Greenfield Park. A group of artists had gathered to unveil a new mural, a vibrant piece celebrating the city's diversity. At the center of the mural was a silhouette of a boy sitting on a park bench, surrounded by symbols of unity and inclusion. Below it, a quote read, "Change begins when we confront our own fears and biases." Fiona placed a hand on Omari's shoulder as they admired the artwork. "That's you," she said with a smile. Omari nodded, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "Yeah, I guess it is." As they walked away, the park buzzed with life, families playing, people chatting, and laughter echoing through the air. It was a small but meaningful step toward a better Bristol. Please, if you enjoy true life story like this, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more captivating stories.